Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be exploring the interval between death and rebirth, according to the findings of reincarnation research. With me is anthropologist Dr. James Matlock, who is co-author with Erlander Haraldson of a recently published book called I Saw a Light and Came Here, Children's Experiences of Reincarnation. He has also published dozens of academic papers on reincarnation and related fields, and he has contributed to the Psi Encyclopedia, published by the British Society for Psychical Research. In addition, he has authored a course called Signs of Reincarnation, which is probably the only academic course focusing exclusively on reincarnation. Welcome, Jim. Pleasure to be with you.
Glad to be here.
And we're getting into a topic that I think most of our viewers will be very interested in. We have accounts of afterlife experience through near-death experience and through mediumistic accounts. But the window afforded by young children who remember their past lives is also a very important tool for researchers to begin to get a handle on this experience, which from the findings of reincarnation research is not just a fantasy, but a very lived, real experience for these children.
Yes, and it's not an uncommon one. Mm-hmm. We see these, what we call intermission memories, in about 20% of cases.
And we're talking 20% of 2,500 cases in the files at the University of Virginia.
Right, mm-hmm. And that's not even all that researchers have come up with. That's,
there are other research centers.
There are other researchers that have not been reported, either collecting cases that haven't been reported. Mm-hmm. But it's the most, it's the largest. And one of the first studies of this phenomenon of the was done by researchers there, by Jim Tucker and a colleague at the University of Virginia.
Yes,
studied the phenomenon of intermission memories.
Mm-hmm. And they found?
They were the first to find them in about 20% of their collection.
Yes,
including both published and unpublished cases. They identified 3 stages to the intermission experience cross-culturally, and then focused on cases in Burma to illustrate them. The 3 stages being somewhat analogous to the near-death experience. The first stage was the period immediately after death. The second stage was the period without the body, in a discarnate realm state, and the third stage in that sample, that study, was the choice of the selection of the parents for the next life.
Mm-hmm. Now, I gather you've elaborated on this to come up with 5 stages.
That's right. More recently, Iris Giesler and I did a study of published cases. That was, we didn't have access to the full database of, at the University of Virginia. So we focused only on published cases. And we identified really 5 stages. The 4th stage being life in the womb, and the 5th stage being then birth.
So these children actually have memories of life in the womb and their birth?
Some do. It's more rare. The majority of the memories are of the first 3 stages.
Yes.
But there are some memories of the womb and birth as well.
Well, let's go through these a bit more in detail.
All right.
Like, for example, immediately after death, I'm assuming from the little bit that I've looked at some of this research, it's a period of confusion.
It can be. It can be. It depends on how sudden the death was.
Yeah.
If the death was very sudden, there can be a period of confusion, as you would expect. If the death was more natural and it was more expected, then you don't see those same confusions. There can be a period of lack of awareness. Or the awareness can just continue uninterrupted into the after-death state.
And this is from accounts of children who...
This is from accounts of children.
Yeah.
So many of whom recall previous lives as well.
Yeah.
So they recall the previous lives in enough detail that the previous person, as we say, the person whose life they're remembering, can actually be identified.
Yeah.
So those what we call solved cases. So their memories are good enough to remember back to the lives of people, many of whom were strangers to their present families, but can yet be identified on the basis of things that they say. And then they continue to say, well, after death, I had these experiences.
Yeah, one of the other things I've heard it said about the period immediately after death is you're very close to the physical plane. You're aware of your body. You're aware of the people mourning. You might actually even attend your own funeral.
Right. And some of these children, bear that out. They talk about perceiving and interacting even with the material world and with people still living during that period. In fact, we find these perceptions and interactions during all 5 stages. It's not just that first stage.
And you hear about earthbound spirits who kind of get stuck in that stage.
Yes, and I don't know that I really accept that idea. Yes, it is a common one. This idea of earthbound spirits who can't quite move on, and it's sometimes said that the earthbound spirits are the ones who then reincarnate, or after perhaps being seen as apparitions for a while or acting as poltergeists, and then eventually they free them. So if they can't move on, you see, into these into the higher realms of heaven or whatever, into the afterlife, they're destined then to be pulled back to Earth. But the data doesn't really suggest.
No,
don't
I
really
seem to
suggest
recall at least one case in which it was described that way. I have a vague memory of a soldier being killed in battle in a foreign country, and then just sort of hanging around until he found a suitable body to repossess.
Right. Well, Iris and I looked at this, in our study, and we found something rather interesting. In cases from Asia, there is rarely a movement away from the earth plane into what in the West we call heaven. And so in Asia, children tend to recall staying, say, in a pagoda or a tree. There is some physical place close to Earth in which they stay.
How many cases were you able to look at, Asian cases?
I believe we had 86 cases altogether, and 50-odd Asian, and the rest were Western.
So it's a healthy sample.
It was a healthy sample. But it was predominantly Asian still, but a good number of Western too.
Yeah.
It was a good enough sample for us to do statistical analysis.
And so you noticed a difference between the accounts from Asia and the accounts from Europe and North America.
Right, phenomenologically, and the differences were strong enough, they were frequent enough to show up statistically.
Yeah.
And we had quite a strong statistical difference for those who understand statistics, the probability value is P with 5 zeros.
That's pretty
and then,
small. Unlikely to be simply a chance result.
Right.
But then to determine what was the cause of that difference, I know you lean towards psychological causes.
Well, yes, in the sense that I think what is involved here is carrying beliefs and expectations into the afterlife, and then having those beliefs and expectations continue to influence the mind, the spirit, after death, just as they do when we're embodied. So our minds are influenced, our thoughts are conditioned by our beliefs, our expectations after death. And what would be more natural than our after-death experience to be influenced by our expectations we held in life? And those, of course, are heavily influenced by culture.
Now, some philosophers have suggested that the after-death state is very much akin to the dream state. Does that seem to be the case in the accounts you've looked at?
No, I can't say so. The descriptions that children give of what they remember do not sound at all dreamlike. They sound as if they were in full possession of their faculties, able to think rationally, able to make decisions rationally. So no, it does not seem at all dreamlike.
Now, you also, a few minutes ago, mentioned the idea of the poltergeist, that is a deceased spirit being able to psychokinetically cause effects in the physical realm.
That's right. In parapsychology, a poltergeist is, a noisy spirit. It comes from the German. It is a German word. And it's a spirit that has physical effects, right, on the material world. Let's say around death, a picture falls. That's one classic example of a poltergeist. Or that's associated with a deceased spirit. Now, we need to say, a lot of poltergeists are associated with living agents, particularly teenagers. But here we're talking about poltergeists that have deceased agents. A number of children recall, actually a minority, but a few children recall doing things which had an impression on the physical world.
So, in other words, of a psychokinetic nature.
A psychokinetic nature. And what is significant here, both with the perceptions of the material world and the interactions of the material world, they may be veridical. That is factually correct. So that living people, witnesses, observed these same things. For instance, there was an Indian case of a boy who said that after his death as a child, he had stayed in a tree in the yard, in the courtyard of his former family, and there had observed a number of things that had occurred after his death that turned out actually to be correct. He had also gotten upset with two women who came to swing on a branch of the tree in which he was staying, caused the plank of the spring to break. And this actually had occurred.
I see. He caused it.
He caused it. He said, and it actually occurred.
Okay, and so there was independent confirmation
of it. Right, exactly. And so, while a lot that is said about what transpires during the intermission really cannot be verified, because it's sort of fantastic, it does include veridical perceptions and veridical actions like that. So it's hard to dismiss these accounts altogether. Well,
at some point, stage one merges into the next stage.
That's correct. Well, stage one, yes. And we've been talking really about more about stage two, which is the period of the discarnate existence here. When we're talking about these things staying in the peepal tree, it was a sacred fig tree that he stayed in.
So the different in stage two, stage one, they're all very Eastern and Western, are close to the physical plane.
But basically, yes. And we're observing, yes, basically, yes.
And stage two, the Western,
go up to heaven, and there meet Jesus and, deceased family members and, and so forth. Whereas in Asia, they don't go to heaven. They continue to stay on the earthly plane, in the tree, in a pagoda. One child said he stayed in a calabash, a broken calabash by a path, for instance. But in some location, but on a location on the earthly plane.
What is a calabash?
A gourd, a half gourd.
Aha, I see. Well, could be a very comfortable place for a spirit to hang out, I suppose.
Why not? And you see, by staying by the path, allowed him then to observe passers-by on the path and choose the woman that he wanted to be reborn to. Oh. And this is something that comes up quite commonly in these cases, particularly in the Asian cases on the earthly plane. The spirits stay in a certain place. One spirit, after he was a child, and after death, he had gone out. He had wanted, first of all, to go back. This is a case in Burma or Myanmar, as it's called, as it is now. And there, they have the tradition of a sacred thread that's put around the house after death to keep evil spirits from entering. Well, this boy also felt that he could not enter because of the sacred thread. He was scared of it. Yeah. And so instead of going back into the house, which he would have liked to have done, gone back to his mother, he went to the well, waiting for his mother to come to the well. But instead of his past life mother coming to the well, his future mother came to the well. He liked her, got in her basket, and accompanied her home. And these sorts of accounts turn up very often in these cases, particularly in Asia. And you can see how by staying close to the earth, they're sort of making possible for them to come into association with their parents.
So in the Asian cases, how do you separate the first stage from the second?
Oh, well, the first stage simply has to do with events immediately around death. And we can say that it ends with the funeral or the cremation, whatever. And that from that point on, we're in we move from the immediate vicinity of the death to a different location where the spirit will stay. Sometimes there's some movement around, but the demarcation is simply from the immediate surroundings of the death place to a place that can be a more permanent period, place in which the spirit may stay for a longer period of time before choosing to be reborn.
Now, and I presume that you're looking at psychological differences between Asians and Westerners that account for these statistically significant differences in their reports.
Well, I'm looking for cultural influences on the mindset. And so in that sense, psychological, but not beyond that, really. I don't see any evidence beyond that. I'm not sure what sort of Asian versus Western psychologies there would be that we would, but anything that it becomes cultural, any psychological set that is cultural, it's large enough, to move beyond sort of an individual to a cultural sort of thing, we can see, reflected in the cases.
Because I know in Asian and Chinese culture, for example, the concept of heaven is very real. It's not as if they lack a concept of heaven.
Right. Well, and in the earlier accounts, it was actually a subterranean, it wasn't a heaven in the sky. It was a subterranean thing. We don't have, we don't have many Chinese cases, current cases, that had been possible to go there and study them. So we just have historical cases. And I don't believe any of the Chinese cases have intermission memories. I can't think of one right offhand that does. So we can't really compare that. Although I'm remembering now one, an old one from early centuries of the first millennium, where there was an intermission passed in the underworld. So, well, did you have a...
Let's move on then. Let's go and look at the third stage.
All right. The third stage is the selection of the parents. Now, the selection of the parents can be either voluntary, like I described, the spirit who it chose its mother because it passed by the well, for instance.
There's a sense of affection or attachment.
Attachment of some sort.
It's as if the spirit...
See, that's psychological too.
They're making their own choice.
They're making their own choice, and they make their own choice on the basis of some sort of psychological pull.
Yeah.
They feel attracted to the mother for some way. Another example of that would be a body thrown into the river.
Yeah.
The death was from a plague in this case, and they didn't want to bury it, so they threw it into the river.
Yeah.
And the spirit saw its new mother, bathing in the river, liked her, went to her, and became her child. So this sort of, I call this elective reincarnation, where the spirit chooses for itself. There's also what I like to call assisted reincarnation, which is, again, what it sort of sounds like, where the selection of the parents is assisted by another spirit.
We're talking about what we might think of as a spirit guide.
A spirit guide, or a Jesus figure, or some figure in the met in the afterlife.
Typically, I think you indicated to mean a non-human.
A non-human spirit. Although, in some cases, particularly tribal cases, it can be a relative. But in Western and Asian cases, it tends to be a non-human spirit.
Okay.
But now, one of the interesting things that we found, Iris and I found, besides the distinction between the past life, or the interlife, shall we say, on a terrestrial plane in Asia versus in heaven in the West, is that the spirits, the non-human spirits encountered during the intermissions, in both Western and Asian cases, tend to fall into the same roles.
Okay.
And we call those roles the gatekeeper.
The gatekeeper?
The guide or the escort. And then the entity in charge.
Okay.
And then there were other spirits who had less distinctive roles, which simply lumped into as other
various helpers.
And then there's various helpers, and indistinguishable spirits. Just general spirits. We call them other. They didn't have any distinctive roles.
I mean, it sounds a little bit like the biblical description of the heavenly hosts.
Well, I think so. Yes, it does. And then also occasionally there would be human spirits, some of whom were deceased relatives that were also seen. But among the non-human spirits, we find these same roles: the gatekeeper, the guide, and the entity in charge. And what's interesting, though, is that they are perceived differently in different cultures.
According to the cultural conditioning.
Exactly. So that whereas in the West, and it's very common, we see this also in what are called pre-birth memories too, which are like intermission memories, but without the previous life, memory to go along with it. So we can't say definitely there is a memory, it's an intermission. It's a period before birth. In those cases, also, you find the same entities, and in near-death experiences, you find the same. Often, gatekeepers and guides or escorts and entities in charge. But whereas in the West, the entities in charge, let's say, are interpreted almost always as either God or Jesus. In Asia, it's Yama, who's the king of death, or one of his helpers.
Right.
And whereas other spirits in the West are angels, in Asia they're interpreted as minor deities, in whatever in culturally appropriate ways.
Sure.
And the same thing in the tribal cultures. Now, we don't have many tribal intermission experiences. But I've recently done a study of the Tlingit, where I found 6 near-death experiences and 3 intermission memory experiences in the historical record.
Reported in the published reports.
In ethnographic reports from the 1850s to from the 1860s to the 1950s. And they're very similar in their structure.
So, but what you've just said, to make it clear, is that the accounts from the near-death literature are very similar to the accounts of the memories of children who remember past lives.
They really are. I mean, the main difference is that in near-death experiences, of course, the return is to the old body.
Yeah.
Whereas in intermission memories, they go on to a new body. But that's really the difference there. And then with the intermission memories, of course, because you have a new body, you also have the possibility of memories of life in the womb and of birth.
So if we were to think of the afterlife as like another continent somewhere, and people visit the continent, travelers, and then they come back and they have stories of their travels, and some got to the continent by air and some by sea, or we might say some through reincarnation memory and some through near-death experience, the fact that the accounts are similar, they correspond with each other, suggests that this might be, in some sense, an objective place, an ontologically real place.
Right. I prefer not to think of it as a place, though, but just as a state of mind. I think it's simpler if we think of it as a state of mind, because then we can understand better the psychological influences on that state of mind. If it's a place, we have to explain why that place is perceived so differently by even Westerners. I mean, each person seems to perceive things slightly differently.
Well, if several different people were to go visit the zoo and come back and tell you what they saw at the zoo, you would get very different accounts from different people.
The old blind man and the elephant thing. Everybody sees what they want to see. I mean,
we all are drawn to different things.
Different parts, of it. And that could be part of it. I tend to think of it more as a state of mind.
You don't want to go so far as to say that the afterlife is ontologically real?
Well, I think there's an objective element to all of this that is beyond the subjective element. So I think there is an objective reality probably to the afterlife that's represented by the non-human spirits. But I think the experience probably passes in a psychological state, and it's a state of mind, and not in a physical place.
Okay.
One thing that suggests that it's not a physical place is that you do have perceptions of the physical world, of the material world, and interactions with the material world at all stages. So it's not as if, there's only interaction right around the time of death, and then they move on somewhere else. They can continue to have perceptions and interactions that are veridical. I'll give you an example of one at stage 3, the choice of the parents. For an American case, a well-known American case of James Lineker, the pilot.
It's shot been down all over television.
Right. It's a very well-known case. He remembered that, and remember, he was shot down near Iwo Jima, but he had flown out of Pearl. His boat had sailed out of Pearl Harbor.
The previous persons,
and he had been the pilot on an aircraft carrier. That had sailed out of Pearl Harbor during World War II. He returned to Hawaii after death. Or so he said, and that's where he found his parents when they were vacationing in Hawaii. He described seeing them on the beach, which they had dined on the beach, and he recalled then seeing them in a pink hotel. They'd actually stayed in a pink hotel. And that's how he joined them. So there are veridical perceptions. I mean, right around the time of death, during the period, the discarnate period, at the point where the parents are chosen. And then there can also be veridical memories of the period in the womb and even of birth.
Well, it's fascinating that you have verifiable memories of being, let's say, on the beach in Hawaii by a pink hotel, and yet anybody there with a camera wouldn't have been able to photograph that spirit.
Some people claim they can photograph spirits.
Yes, I know that's another interesting topic.
Interesting area. Yeah, that's a little bit off. But generally, no. I mean, these aren't. But on the other hand. Apparitions are perceived in these cases sometimes. Yes. Apparitions can be perceived during the time, during the intermission period.
And of course, many people report apparitions of their deceased loved ones.
Well, that's right. But apparitions can also appear during the intermission period and be associated with the spirit that is recalled by the child. In other words, in one case, an Asian case, a boy recalled having been a pilot flying a light plane which crashed near his brother's house, and he walked towards the house. Meanwhile, his former sister-in-law, came out of the outhouse, saw him walking towards her as an apparition, saw her as an apparition. Yeah. And it said to him, she said to him out loud, and he heard it, you're welcome to come stay with us, knowing he had died at this point, but, showing him as an apparition and, welcoming him to come and be reincarnated to her.
Yeah, in some cultures, that's how it would go.
And that's exactly. Yeah. Now, in the same case, he also appeared to her as a dream, in a dream, and in the dream, he recalled this dream, which she also recalled.
Yes.
That is, the boy recalled having sent a dream to his new mother. Yeah. His new mother recalled the dream.
These are called announcement dreams.
These are called announcing dreams. Yes. That's right, where the mother has a dream during pregnancy or sometimes before pregnancy, but related to the child that will be born.
In other words, not just a question of choosing the parent. There can be back and forth communication.
There can be back and forth interaction, exactly, which does suggest that it's not just that the intermission is not just a passive experience, that there really is interaction here. And there is a persistence of cognition, of will, of decision-making, ability for decision-making.
And the idea of sending an announcing dream, like, get ready, I'm coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Is reported quite a bit in the literature, isn't it?
That's right. Announcing dreams are quite common, and in many different cultures. Stevenson said at one point he had found them in all cultures, but they're relatively uncommon in some, like among the Druze, who believe that you're reborn immediately.
The Druze of Lebanon.
Syria, and in Golan Heights in Israel, in that area there. They believe that you're reborn from death immediately into the body of a child being born.
Instantly.
A child being born at that time. And in among the Druze, you don't find announcing dreams. Now, except that occur before birth. You sometimes find announcing dreams that occur after birth.
Oh.
Very early in life, the new mother will have a dream, of a child.
And does the child remember having sent that dream?
Usually not, and this is the point I was going to make. It's very unusual for intermission memories to include sending the dream, but the dreams are much more common, and they do suggest that during the intermission there was consciousness that continued, that is not recalled then by the child.
But now, some of these children actually remember the childbirth.
Yes, that's rare, but there is a case.
They report that they do.
They report that they do. There's a case reported by Jim Tucker, which actually it's unique in having memories of all 5 stages. He recalled having been in the womb with his brother, his present life brother, who was younger than him, but he recalled being as a twin with him in the womb. And then something happened, and there was a miscarriage, and they were pushed out of the womb. He recalled then that during that period he recalled being unable to return to that mother because the womb was already occupied by somebody else, and having to go to a relative and being reborn there. He recalled that he had trouble being born, and he had felt that the doctor had kept trying to push him back into the womb, but he wanted to be born so bad. He resented being pushed back into the womb. All of these things turned out actually to be true. The woman, as I said, was a relative of the mother. Had been carrying twins, had a miscarriage, lost the twins, and shortly after that had gotten pregnant again with a cousin of this boy, who was born some months or a couple of years later to, and I can't remember whether the mothers were sisters or there was but they were either sisters or there was a in-law relationship. Yes, there. And then, but it was he was presenting supine, and the doctor was trying to turn him over, and his mother explained that to him, that the reason he was getting pushed back into the room is that he wasn't supposed to be on his back as he was coming out of the womb. The doctor was trying to turn him over, and he said, "Oh, if I had only known that,
I would have helped him."
And then he said, and then they cleaned all the slime off of me, and then I could get some sleep.
Interesting account.
It is a very interesting account. And, he also remembered all of the other stages, you see. So it does show that the consciousness can continue from death all the way through to birth. But it's very rare to find that.
Well, probably one of the most interesting findings that you came across is that the length of the interval between lifetimes varies according to the culture.
Yes. Yes, it does. Yes, and in Western cases it tends to be much longer. And this is one in which there was a relatively short intermission. But very often in Western cases it's a number of decades, not just a few years.
Whereas in the Asian cases it's really a question of months.
Very often just a question of months or of just a few years. And in some societies, like the Jews again, to come back to them, where they believe that instantaneous rebirth, we don't have cases of instantaneous rebirth among the Jews, but we do. But the median intermission is only a few months.
Only a few months. So, which suggests that the length of time one spends in the, we'll call it the afterlife, is dependent upon one's expectation.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
And it may very well be that the reason for the longer intermission in Western cases is that we expect to be around to meet our loved ones when they die, or our loved ones expect to see us when they die. Or we would like to communicate with them through a medium. Or we simply don't believe that we can be reincarnated, and so we don't even try.
Very few people, relatively speaking, in the Western world accept reincarnation.
Right, and so it doesn't even occur to them as a possibility. And it may be that reincarnation is simply a natural pull, that we can exercise control over if we wish, under the right circumstances, but otherwise it will just eventually happen. Sooner or later to us, whether we want it to or not. I mean, it's one possibility. We really can't say.
Well, Dr. Jim Matlock, once again, an enlightening conversation.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed it, Jeff.
About a fascinating topic, really.
It is fascinating. It absolutely is, yes.
Thank you once again for being with me.
Well, I'm very glad to be here.
And thank you for being with us.